So the killing of Malcolm X has been a fascinating topic for a very long time because there's a lot of question marks surrounding the situation. Well, now there's at least been some justice that's been brought about. So take a look at this. So on the right there, it says, District Attorney apologizes, calls out J. Edgar Hoover as men exonerated in murder of Malcolm X. We are moving today to vacate the convictions and dismiss the indictments, Vance said. I apologize for what were serious, unacceptable violations of law and the public trust. The long-awaited announcement drew rousing applause from those in the courtroom. Aziz, previously known as Norman Butler, spent 22 years in prison before he was paroled in 1985. Confessed assassin Thomas Hagen, who served 45 years in prison, had long said that neither man participated in killing the fiery civil rights leader. So there were 3 people who were locked up. One of them actually did it and was caught at the scene. The other 2, the guy who partook in the killing, said these other 2 have nothing to do with it. Vance said that certain witnesses, acting under orders from then FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, were ordered not to reveal they were FBI informants. Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam were wrongly convicted of this crime, Vance said. Aziz sat at the defense table wearing a white mask next to his attorney, David Shanes, who called Aziz and Islam innocent young black men and accused the New York Police Department and the FBI of covering up evidence. So let me give you guys some more information on this because I've seen every Malcolm X speech that is seeable. I've seen every Malcolm X documentary that's out there. I've seen. So I happen to know quite a bit about what went down. Now, so Malcolm was killed in the 1960s on a winter day. He went to go give a speech. Now, there were already attempts on his life, like recently, within a month of him actually being killed, there were already a number of attempts on his life. Somebody tried to firebomb his house, and his kids were in there, and he was in there. And when he went that day to go give a speech, he noticed something was off, and he didn't feel right about it because the other speakers who were supposed to be there with him, there were at least 2 other speakers who were supposed to be there with him. None of them showed up. The other thing is, so some of his security detail was there. Malcolm's private security was there. But usually at a speech like that, there'd also be some NYPD, a perimeter protection. And they didn't show up either. So now what we've learned over time is that there was some involvement. Well, so the FBI had informants in Malcolm's inner circle and also in the Nation of Islam, which of course he had left. But so they were in the circle. Did they know? Did they not know? I don't know if the FBI informants knew or didn't know. But what I know for sure is this. Some elements of the government, whether it was the FBI or definitely the NYPD, they were at least going to allow the attempt on Malcolm's life to happen and the murder of Malcolm to happen. Now, again, was it facilitated by the government, orchestrated by the government? We don't know that level of detail because Malcolm had a falling out with the Nation of Islam, which basically, by his own admission, took him from like a street thug to making him this law-abiding citizen who is a civil rights leader fighting for black liberation, at one time black nationalism, and he became the most dynamic, powerful speaker on the topic and took the Nation of Islam from a group that had a couple hundred or a couple thousand people in it to some estimates up to 300,000 people joined the Nation of Islam. And they took a lot of former criminals, cleaned them up, gave them self-respect, and made them really fierce advocates in favor of, black independence, if you will. And so, but Malcolm had a falling out because his teacher, Elijah Muhammad, who was the head of the Nation of Islam, he realized that in some ways this guy was a fraud. He was preaching all these, moral values and a very conservative, personal way of living, but he was sleeping with 5 of his secretaries and they were having his babies. And so Malcolm saw that flaw. There were also political disagreements. Malcolm became like the face of the Nation of Islam, even though Elijah Muhammad was the leader, and everybody in the group sort of viewed Elijah Muhammad almost as like a demigod. And there were disagreements because Malcolm famously said about JFK that like, oh, JFK got shot? Well, I guess the chickens are coming home to roost. And Elijah Muhammad had warned him, don't you dare speak about JFK in a negative way because the country loves this guy and you're going to bring heat on us and we don't want that. Another instance, there was something that happened in L.A., where some members of the Nation of Islam got shot by police officers. And apparently behind the scenes, Malcolm X literally wanted to go to war with the LA Police Department. Like guns, bunch of, of his brothers in the Nation of Islam. They go there and literally have war with the Nation of Islam. And Elijah Muhammad was like, are you fucking crazy? You can't go to war with the police department. They'll take down our entire organization. They'll find some way to take down our entire organization. The other thing is Elijah Muhammad was personally corrupt. And, all the finances for the Nation of Islam, they would run through him. And Malcolm really believed in all the values and the ideals and the veneer that was put out there by the Nation of Islam. And when he saw that this guy is personally corrupt, he has moral failings, and in some ways is a fraud, that's when Malcolm X ended up splitting with them. And so the loyalty in the Nation of Islam to Elijah Muhammad was so deep that now you got this guy who's basically a turncoat, and he was a marked man. And so there were attempts on his life from the Nation of Islam. Even, by the way, Louis Farrakhan, he was in the Nation of Islam. He was, you could see Louis Farrakhan in the background in some of Malcolm's speeches at the time. He would give speeches in Harlem, and you'd see Louis Farrakhan sitting there. So he was younger than Malcolm, and he looked up to Malcolm. And, listen, I've seen sermons from Louis Farrakhan from the 90s where he basically is like, well, if we killed him, so what if we did? Woo, damn, son. Like, just letting it hang out. So anyway, point is here, the Nation of Islam had made attempts on his life. And, but at the very least, when he actually was killed, you had the involvement or the acceptance of the NYPD and the FBI. And this shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. They tried to get MLK to kill himself, by writing him the letters and saying, we know about the affairs you're having. By the way, they did the same spying on Malcolm X as they did on MLK, and they found that Malcolm X was squeaky clean. No vices by the time he was, an adult. So, and J. Edgar Hoover was open about the fact that this is the kind of person we fear because he's a strong leader. He's incredibly charismatic. He gets a devoted following. And so they needed to find a way to try to take him down. And they did the old-fashioned divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. So draw a wedge between Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, make him a pariah. He became a pariah. And then, of course, it wasn't long before he was dead. So we know there's a documentary that came out on this recently. One of the people, again, who killed Malcolm, he was caught at the scene. This person says there were 5 people total involved. They had put 3 people behind bars, but 2 of them were not. They were from the Nation of Islam chapter in Harlem, and everybody knew you're not going to send the assassins in New York from New York. So they actually came from Newark, New Jersey. And there was a documentary on this recently where one of the dudes who did it he's still out walking around in New Jersey. And somebody tracked him down in a wonderful documentary that you should check out on Netflix. But the fact that now you have an exoneration of one of the guys who was wrongly accused, who spent decades in prison, well, that's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing. And it just goes to show you, if they're willing to, in such a high-profile case, if they're willing to flat out disregard and overlook facts just to take somebody down, have a fall person, they're willing to be unscrupulous probably in most, if not all, circumstances. Because even the investigation afterward, when Malcolm was murdered, it happened in, I forget which ballroom it was, but so his speech was in the ballroom in the morning, and they had like a dance at 7 o'clock at night. They were like, clean up the crime scene and make sure we can have the dance come in here at 7. The civil rights leader just got murdered. And they're like, yeah, wrap it up. So, look, it was nefarious to its core. And that should get you thinking, well, in how many other circumstances is it nefarious? And what this story should tell you for sure is, for the love of God, the death penalty is archaic and outdated and primitive because we often get the wrong people. I mean, there was one study that came out of the UK that found 4% of the time the people on death row are totally innocent. 4%. Now, if you're okay with that, you're okay with people being murdered with your tax dollars 4% of the time. That's fucking crazy. Same thing with mandatory minimums. You really want mandatory minimums? I mean, there should definitely be, like, the Innocence Project is fantastic, and they do a lot of work trying to get people who didn't do it off. But, I mean, geez, you need an army of people like that because look at all the terrible, terrible, terrible miscarriages of justice that happened in just this case. And this was a high-profile case. It almost reminds me of how the hell did Tupac get murdered in Las Vegas after a Tyson fight where there's more people than you can even wrap your mind around, and they didn't end up catching anybody? If there was ever a place, if I had to choose a place to get murdered, I would pick on the Vegas Strip after a Tyson fight so I can guarantee that my case would be found out. Well, that's what happened to Tupac, and nobody went down for it. Not to make a comparison between Tupac and Malcolm X. I think that's actually very disrespectful of Malcolm, but you get the point. So, thankfully, this guy's exonerated, and will we ever have all the answers to this stuff? I don't know, man. I mean, look at JFK's assassination. Do we have all the answers to that? Here we are decades and decades and decades later, and now more than ever, Americans, over 50% of Americans say, I don't believe the official story. So they want to keep us in the dark, and oftentimes they want to keep us in the dark on purpose, but at least in this instance, thankfully, the guy got off, and he didn't do it. So that's a glorious thing. He's exonerated, his name is cleared, and he never should have been in there in the first place. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.